What's up, everybody? I'm Zach Evans, and today we're going to be talking about using positive motivation loops and a compound effect to get the most out of your practice time. Then we're going to be talking about why results per minute of practice time is the most important stat you want to focus on as a piano player. And if you ever feel like you're just stuck in your practicing and you're practicing a lot and not making a lot of progress, we're going to talk about how to get unstuck so you can consistently make that big progress when you're practicing. All right, I'm all ready to go. Let's get started. So first off, if you ask me what's the single most important skill in learning piano, most people would say maybe like scales or playing by ear or some aspect of it. Honestly, the number one important skill is the skill of practicing. And the problem is most teachers and most students don't see practicing as a skill. It's just kind of like, that's just something I do. You go to the piano and you practice. But there's an art to structuring your practice in a very efficient way. The reason this is important is because this is basically putting a multiplier on everything you practice, right? If you want to get good at sight reading, if you're doing it very efficiently, you can 2x, 3x, 4x the progress you're making in your sight reading. Your technique, you can 2x, 3x, 4x your technique progress with the same amount of practice time, which is why getting your practice sessions really efficient, it's like rising the tide for everything else you do after that. Now, the biggest reason you want to focus on the skill of practicing is it's absolutely critical for motivation. Here's what I mean. There's basically two types of motivation, and the problem is most piano students only use the first type. So the first type is kind of the obvious type of motivation. You're motivated by the music. And that's, of course, you hear a song on YouTube, you hear a song on the radio, and you think, man, if I could play that song, it would be so freaking cool. And that motivates us to get into the music, right? That motivates us to buy the sheet music or to start learning it by ear. But the problem is within 3, 4, 5 days, if you're still trying to learn the music and you still haven't got up to that full speed and you're not hearing yourself play the actual song, that motivation starts to fade and it starts to get lower and lower. And that's why a ton of people, that happens all the time, they get super jacked up about a new piece of music, and then within 3, 4, 5 days, they quit. They didn't learn it and they quit. And it's kind of sad because the reason they can't keep consistent is they're not using the second form of motivation. The second form is the long-term form of motivation, and that's the motivation by accomplishment. That's when you do something, you get the results, and you feel good about it. And how we train this kind of motivation is by breaking down our song into very small sections, creating goal sheets for each section, using very specific ways of practicing to achieve each goal, and then checking off each box once we've achieved each miniature sub goal. And I'm going to have the exact system how to do that a little later. I'll tell you more about that. And there's a huge benefit to that because even when the motivation of the music itself starts to wane, you can still get motivated by your achieving each small step towards your goal. And this is really the difference I see all the time between people who make it in piano and people that don't, is their ability to stay motivated even when the music itself isn't keeping them motivated. And it's also huge if you're practicing stuff like scales or arpeggios, which aren't musically beautiful, but you still need to practice them to get your technique up. Practicing using the accomplishment motivation is how you can stay motivated throughout all of that. All right, now let's talk about results per minute of practice time and why it's the most important statistic you can focus on as a piano player. Now, let's say you practice a song let's say you practice 4 hours and you get 4 measures of the song learned, right? So your results per minute or per hour, let's say, is 1 measure per hour, right? Now that's not going to keep you motivated because you practice 4 hours, you're really tired, you spend all this effort and energy, and you only got 4 measures learned. Now on the other hand, let's say you practice 1 hour and you get 4 measures learned. Now your results, you're getting 1 measure per every 15 minutes. Now after that 1 hour, you're not as tired, stuff like that, and you can see the progress. And that's why it's so important to use results per minute and not total results as your indicator of how fast you're improving and how motivated you can stay when you're practicing piano. Now let's take this one step further. Now let's think about your long-term progress, okay? So let's say for every hour you practice, you gain 1% in your, piano abilities. Obviously this is an arbitrary number, but let's say you gain 1%. And let's say person B practices 1 hour, and every time they practice 1 hour, they gain 2% in their piano abilities. Now the difference between 1% and 2% is a very small amount in the short term. But now let's say over a year of practicing, that 1% and 2% every single day, the 2% is going to start to get bigger and bigger, because if you say over a year you practice 1,000 hours, the guy that's practicing and getting 2% is getting 2,000 hours worth of practice time out of his 1,000 hours of practice. So obviously in the long term, that little difference in practice is going to be huge results. Plus what we're going to talk about next, which is the compound effect. But before we get into the compound effect, I want to talk about creating a positive motivation loop. So basically what this is, well, let me explain a negative motivation loop first. That's when you practice, you don't get very much results. Then the next day you're less motivated to practice, still don't get much results. And then you start skipping days, you start cutting practice sessions off early, you start getting distracted to your practice sessions. So now you even get less results, which makes you even less motivated. Now even less motivated, you get even more distracted, you skip even more practice sessions, and that's a downward spiral that leads people to quit piano. Now on the other hand, let's say you're creating a positive motivation loop, right? So you wake up, you practice, and you get a lot of results for a small amount of practice time. Now you wake up the next morning, you look at your goal sheet and you think, oh, I already checked off these 3 boxes. I'm making a lot of progress. So now when you practice, you're now excited to practice, right? You practice more, you get more results. You wake up and you think, man, this is freaking awesome. So now you're very consistent practicing and you're very focused every time you practice. You're really into it. And then that consistent practice leads to even more motivation. That more motivation leads to results. Those results lead to more consistent practice. And it just keeps looping. And that's when people spiral up. And this is a huge difference between people that spiral up in their motivation and people that spiral down. And on top of that, we're going to talk about the compound interest effect. Now, if you had a 401k or any kind of investment, you know, that's basically what makes people millionaires. Because when you put in $1,000 a month over the course of, let's say, 10 years, after that 10 years, you've not only gained that $1,000 a month that you've been putting in, but you also gain the interest on top of that. And now that interest is making interest, and that's how you can basically exponentially ramp up your savings. Now for piano, it works the same way, because if you're practicing, let's say 30 minutes a day, right? But let's say you're practicing using accomplishment motivation, you're checking off your goals every day, you're staying motivated. Now every day you practice 30 minutes, but you're so motivated, you've seen your goals that you're checking off. Now all of a sudden, instead of 30 minutes, you might practice 45 minutes a couple days a week, right? You might practice an hour because you're so motivated, your practice sessions are getting longer. That extra 15 minutes, 30 minutes that you're practicing on top of your normal practice, that's like interest. That's practice time. You wouldn't have practiced if you were in a negative motivation loop, if you weren't motivated, but because you're motivated and you're getting a high results per minute of practice time, that's making you want to practice more. So now all of a sudden, all this interest and extra practice time is building up, and all that extra practice time is getting a high results per minute. You're getting that 2% return on it. So now that's really how people go from this kind of motivation to this kind of motivation. All right, so if you want the nuts and bolts of it, the exact protocol and system I use to stay in that positive motivation loop all the time, I would put it here, but I already created a full lesson on it and it'd be too long to put in this video, but it's completely free. All you have to do is sign up for my Become a Piano Superhuman course. I'll put the link to that right down below and go to the lesson on goal setting and song mapping. All right, that's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. Happy practicing and peace out.